G'day guys, Steve Morgan here for Fishing Monthly Magazine's tackle testing arm, www.tacklejunkie.fish. And we're here at Hinds Dam in southeast Queensland on a beautiful morning. And of course, before you guys get into me for having a petrol motor on Hinds Dam, you're allowed to now. You're not allowed to run it, but they're allowed to be on your boat. So let's get that out of the way early. But we're down here to do a little bit of product testing this morning. And one of the interesting products that I've come across recently, made by a couple of guys in Brisbane, Nabil Issa and Mick Torley, under their company Marine Dynamics. It's what's called the Hydronut, and Mick has supplied me a Hydronut here. It's a nice red nut for Steve Morgan there. This is how they come, and what it is it's a way of replacing the nut and washer system that holds on the propeller to your electric motor. And they have a few claims on their website. They claim that the Hydronut runs quieter, spins smoother, and it stops vibration from your electric motor. Now, the second and third of those points about the smoothness and the vibration, they're reasonably subjective things. But what we can do today is we want to sort of myth bust the fact that one of these Hydronuts, replacing your normal nut, actually does run quieter than the standard setup that comes with the motor. Now, as a fisherman, I can understand the logic. We run an electric motor because it is quiet. We don't want vibrations, we don't want extra noise spooking the fish. So by spending the $65 Australian on the Hydronut, is it going to give us an advantage? So we're going to test it out today. We've gone to Jason Wilhelm, who used to be the Hydrowave distributor in Australia. We've borrowed his underwater hydrophone, which is an underwater microphone. And with a little bit of backyard science, we're going to see if the Hydronut actually works. So we racked our brains and we tried to find an experimental design which is going to show if there are any quantifiable differences between the sound of my Motor Guide X5 electric motor, both with and without the Hydronut. So what we're going to do is we've got a setup here just right next to the boat ramp at Hinds where I've got a gap between these two trees. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this the underwater microphone. We're going to strap that into the tree on this side, facing outward and facing at the motor. I've got enough cable here to run the sound recorder back here on the bank where the camera is going to be. What we're going to do is we'll do half a dozen runs through as is, straight out of the box, on the front of my boat without the Hydronut, and then we're going to do an install of the Hydronut, which only takes one shifting spanner, and then we're going to do half a dozen runs through with that. We can analyse the results, look at the decibels of sound that are coming through on this without changing any of the settings, and we'll do the Hinds Dam Park backyard science comparison to see if there is a distance or not. So let's get this thing set up. So that's it, we've done the 5 runs without the Hydronut on, and immediately it's pretty obvious that a big thing that makes a difference to how much noise you make underwater is what speed you have this set on. At 20%, the levels were fairly low. As you got up to 100%, Maddie, my sound recorder here, said the sounds were actually nearly deafening underwater. So let's do what we can do here. I'm not the most mechanically minded person, but I can definitely put a Hydronut on. These are knurled on the sides so that you can actually put them on by hand. They're threaded to mount to fit the thread on the motor. You just need a spanner to take off your old nut. No, this is a nylock nut, not a Hydronut. So off with the old and on with the Hydronut. Of course, the shear pin underneath the propeller stays in place, and that stays the same. That can be hand tightened pretty well, and that's as easy as it is. I've done up as tight as I can there. The theory behind it is there's a greater force now. There's a rubber gasket in between the outside of the Hydronut and the propeller. So instead of this really small nut holding the propeller on with a small footprint, this holds it on with a reasonably large footprint. Also, the tapered design of it reduces turbulence as you go through the other side. But let's not believe the marketing. Let's go out, see what the Hydronut can do. So we've made it back to the Tacklejunkie offices now, and we've crunched the numbers. The sounds we've downloaded from the little Zoom recorder and the hydrophone. We've quantified the amount of sound that the electric motor was putting out, both with and without the hydrophone. The thing to know before we start talking about the results, though, is how the scale of decibels works. It's not actually a linear scale where, as the number goes up, the sound goes up in a fashion like this. It's a logarithmic scale, which means that every time the amount of sound goes up by 10 decibels, it's an order of magnitude bigger. So 10 decibels is 10 times as much as 0 decibels. 20 is 10 times as much as 10, but 100 times more than 0. When you get up to the 30, 40, 50 decibel level, it's 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 times more than nothing. So just keep that in mind as we run through these results. We did some background atmospheric noise control measures up at HINS, and there's not that much. There's a little bit of bass background noise in HINS, and the reason we did it in HINS is because you do the same sort of test in saltwater. Saltwater environment is really noisy. When we were recording sounds for the hydro waves themselves, there's always shrimps clicking, fish crunching off the rocks on the bottom, fish crunching off pontoons. The sound of the movement of the tide all create a reasonably large background noise. In the freshwater in HINS, there's no current, there's not as many little crustaceans, etc. in there, so it's actually reasonably quiet. So what we found was at 20%, when your motor is just on and just ticking you over, we couldn't tell a difference between a motor that was off and on. So that was pretty cool. If you're out fishing and you're only going that speed, doesn't matter if you've got a Hydronut or not. When you get to 40%, it registered at 5 to 6 decibels above the atmospheric level. So, which means that between 0 and 10 times as much sound was coming out of that electric motor at 40%. When you jump up to 60%, the median decibel level for both, with and without the Hydronut, was 25, which means it was 100 to 1,000 times more than 0. That's a lot more. Get up to 80 and 100%, and this thing, with or without the Hydronut, was dead set deafening. At 80%, 38 to 40 decibels is 10,000 times more than nothing. And when you got up to 100%, 51, 52 decibels, around 100,000 times more than nothing. Interestingly, we couldn't find a reading where without the Hydronut was noisier than with the Hydronut, so we could detect a difference between having the Hydronut on and not with the median values. We could also see with the Hydronut, the little peaks, which were the above normal, little scratches, little pings. There are actually more of those with the Hydronut. So our biggest values happen with the Hydronut on, and maybe that's because the propeller is being held so tight to the armature that it does touch occasionally and it makes some sort of scratching and some sounds above the normal. But overall, and the main thing to take out of this is the amount of power you have your electric motor on has far more effect of the noise you're making than if you have a Hydronut on or not. So the question is it worth buying a Hydronut? Well, if as you're screwing that Hydronut on, you are thinking, as I go up through my scale of electric, I am making more noise, and it makes you aware of that, then it's probably worth it. I find when I fish normally, I like to have the electric motor 20, 30%. Only more if I have to fight against any current. And if I have to fight against current, I'll normally turn around and fish the other way. And what these results show is that the lower you have your electric on, the less the fish are going to be able to detect you there with the electric motor. So if you're going to be aware of that as you put your Hydronut on, it's probably a useful exercise. If you don't carry spare parts, if all you carry is a little shear pin for your electric and you don't carry a shifting spanner, Hydronut's great. You can just take the Hydronut off, put the part on. You can do it with no tools. That's pretty cool as well. But of course, why a lot of us like it is it looks blingy on the front of your boat. So if you want bling for your boat, you want to pay 65 bucks for it, then great. The Hydronut's good. What I can say is the Hydronut doesn't make your electric motor any worse, doesn't make it any noisier for most of the cases. So if you want more information, you can go to marinedynamics.com.au. But until then, there we go. Hydronut, myth busted.